haven't been here long, hi, welcome to my channel. I pronounce things wrong all the time. In fact, I actually pronounce more things incorrectly than I do correctly. Hey, welcome to my video. If you're from my Instagram, I love you, and if you're not from my Instagram, love you all the same. Welcome to Monthly Book Club. It's a series here on my channel where I tell you exactly what I read each month and exactly what I rate it. So, disclaimers before we begin. Number one, I really respect authors, and although I'm here to give you an honest review, I never strive to be mean or disrespectful in any way. Which leads me to my second point. If I give a book a low rating, or even if I DNF it, and you are already planning on reading that book, please don't let my opinion influence you. Honestly, reading is so subjective, and so the reason that I might hate a book might actually be the exact reason that you love it, and vice versa, and obviously both of us are valid in our opinions. And now the last thing, I'm gonna pop some pictures on the screen for you right now so that you're able to see why I rate things the way that I do. Now, obviously, this is all subject to change and vibes and my mood and such, but if that is the case, I do let you know. But yeah, now with all of that being said, let's begin. So we're starting off strong today. We're going with the Shepherd King series, and the books are called One Dark Window and Two Twisted Crowns. Now, I'm gonna be talking about these books together, but I am gonna be rating them separately, and I usually do this when it comes to a series just because I don't want to give away too much of book 2 in case you are planning on reading it. So these books are young adult fantasy romances. Now let me tell you a little bit about them. So it's about an infected kingdom called Blunder, and one of our main heroines here is Elspeth, who is infected herself. She's living with a sort of a monster inside her, shall we say. Now at some point she meets a mysterious highwayman, and together they try and rid the kingdom of the infection. He, by the way, just so happens to be the king's nephew and guilty of high treason. So as you can imagine, that does complicate things a little bit. So in order to help the kingdom, they have to unite 12 Providence cards, but that's obviously not as easy as you would imagine, especially because the monster inside Elspeth is taking over. That's basically the synopsis of the series. Now I do want to say that book 2 also focuses more on his brother and her best friend. So there's two storylines that you kind of have to follow in book 2, which I thought was really interesting, but more about that in a second. But first, let's get the rating out of the way. So we're gonna start with book 1. For me, this was a 4-star read, and I guess we could rate it 1 chili pepper since there was one scene in there which really wasn't that graphic, and I don't even know if I would count it as smut per se, but let's just give it 1 chili pepper. So basically, as soon as I started reading this, I thought the premise was very interesting. I liked both of the main characters in book 1. Elspeth was definitely confident and a badass, and I love strong female characters. Raven, on the other hand, was confident and he was self-assured, definitely a man with a plan. I also did note here that I really did end up liking the side characters as well. Now that's not something too common for me. Usually I do notice the side characters in books. I know that they're there, but I don't really particularly care about them. However, in this book, I did like them, which is great because the side characters become the main characters as well in book 2. Now, also by the end, the book becomes a complete page turner, and it does actually end on a cliffhanger, which meant that as soon as I was done with this book, I was already purchasing book 2, and that was really not my plan. But it did quickly become my plan as I was sitting there at 2 a.m. staring holes into my Kindle. So there you go. So now, book 2. First of all, the rating, no brainer. Honestly, this was a 5-star read for me. Book of the month for sure. And it also gets a 1 chili pepper. Now, as I mentioned, the side characters also become the main characters in this book, and you do simultaneously follow 2 storylines in this one. And honestly, I really thought that was fun. To be real with you, I loved the storyline in book 1, but I felt like if they were just gonna continue that without adding any more dimension in book 2, I honestly would have been over it pretty quickly, but the way that this book is written is so interesting. So the chapters go back and forth between one storyline, and then you're thrown into the second one. And then as soon as you're like so excited about what you're reading, they hook you back onto the first one, girl. So really that meant that for me, there was never a dull moment in this reading experience at all. I had a lot of fun, and I was bothering most of my friends and my boyfriend with the details of this book. Renelm, our other main male character in this book, is one of my favorite men I've read about. And let me tell you something else, honey. The plot twists were plot twisting. Okay? I really did love this book for real. Now, as far as smut is concerned, There was one scene, but it wasn't really dirty. And I always say that I don't really need smut if there's a good storyline, and boy, was there ever. So overall, I did really love this series as a whole, and I'll probably read more by this author, but now we can move on. We're moving on to The Darkest Temptation. Now, this is also a series. This, I believe, is book 3. Now, I obviously read it as a standalone, or actually, I think I maybe might have read one of the other books at some point in the past, but it really doesn't matter because I remember and retained none of it. So I read this one on its own, basically. Now, let me tell you a little bit about what it's about. So this is definitely a dark mafia romance, and I love me some of those. There is also an age gap considering Mila is 20 and Ronan is 32. We start with our heroine, Mila. Her life was covered in secrets, and in wanting to uncover them, she does the only thing that she knows how, and boards a plane and goes to Russia to hopefully find her dad, who's on a business trip, in hopes that he can shed some light on her life. What she doesn't expect though is that her dad is actually part of the mafia and is a horrible man who's done some horrible things and made a lot of enemies. Enter Ronan. Ronan is also part of the mafia who has a personal vendetta against Mila's dad, and he uses Mila to lure her dad out of hiding and takes her hostage. Now obviously close proximity and Stockholm syndrome, I should think, do their thing, and they end up falling for each other, and we have to talk about it. Now let's rate it. First and foremost, for me, this was a very good 4-star read and 2 chili peppers. Now 2 chili peppers is kind of my baseline, but I think I also need to low-key, this has nothing to do with anything, but I need to revisit my rating system and think about it a little bit, because I feel like when I say 2, that means that there's not much spice, but that's actually not true at all. There can definitely be multiple spicy scenes in a book, but I only rate it 3 and above depending on how freaky it actually gets. Well, freaky and creative, to be honest. But anyway, let's get back to the review. So immediately I liked Mila, and honestly I liked the main characters as a couple. They definitely had good banter and there was some funny dialogue in there. Now I do have to mention that in my opinion there were small parts of the dialogue that were a little bit cringy to me, but it really wasn't too severe and there wasn't a lot of it, so I was able to get past that. I also liked the plot and the progression of it. There was also a good amount of smut in here. Nothing super imaginative, like I've read about all this stuff before, but overall I did enjoy it. And because of that, I think I will definitely revisit this series in the future. So last but not least is a book from the Alliance series, and actually this is the first one. It's called Nero. Nero? I think it's Nero, but honestly, who can be sure? So this for me was a highly anticipated read because I've read multiple books by this author before, and what I know of her, I definitely enjoy quite a lot, but specifically, I have read a few books from this series before, and not in the correct order, but now I finally read the whole thing, and we're gonna talk about the second book in a future review, but for now, let's stick with this one. So Nero is part of a criminal organization called the Alliance. And obviously, he's in trouble with the law. Peyton, however, just at home, regular citizen, minding her business, eating popcorn on her couch, okay? And who so happens to break in? Of course, Nero does. And they have one interaction and they both kind of become obsessed with each other. Nero maybe slightly more because he does end up stalking her. Although I don't know if it's considered stalking if she sort of gave him the green light, but honestly, semantics. But anyways, you can definitely correctly predict what happens here, and that's all I'm gonna say because I don't want to spoil it. So rating wise, for me, 4 stars. I loved this book, and also it was 2 chili peppers. I have to say how much I instantly fell in love with Nero. He's definitely so smooth and has so much charisma. One thing I also loved in this book is that the chapters are short and snappy, and I love it. Love when a book has short chapters. Love Pink. If you know that reference, I think we should be friends. I'm just saying. But anyways, another thing that I noticed is that King, Nero's business partner, is so funny and witty, and I actually caught myself thinking, I hope that his book comes next, and you know what, it did, which I loved, which again we will get into. But like I already said today, I really do love it when a book makes me fall in love with its side characters as well. It's definitely a pleasant surprise. Now, one thing I forgot to mention is that this is also an age gap. He's 40, I believe. I think she's 27. But the age gap is not the spotlight of the story. It's not the main focus. The ending, though, was very interesting and super action-packed. So needless to say, it made me want to move on to book 2 as soon as possible, and that I did. But you guys, that's it for my last full review for this video. Now we're moving on to rapid fire reviews, which is where I really elaborate minimally and I just kind of go over what else I read this month. And if you want me to get into it in some future video, then you need to let me know. Otherwise, this is where we'll leave it. So I started the month off by reading Ironling, and that's for me 3 stars and 2 chili peppers. I liked it. I thought it was a good solid read. However, I do think that it could have used some more dynamic plot points or maybe even settings. Then I read Any Means Necessary, and you know what? For this, 2 stars and 2 chili peppers. Mostly because I didn't feel a lot of romance or chemistry up until like 75% of the book. Now we're moving on to controversial yet brave, Older. I know a lot of people love this one. I, however, DNF'd it. It really didn't sit right with me, and not because of the age difference, because I do love a good age gap, more because the power imbalance here felt really severe to me, and I knew that there was no way I could get into it at all. So I saved myself the trouble and stopped reading. Moving on to the playlist, this was 3 stars and 2 chili peppers. I did like it. I thought that all the Taylor Swift references were really cute. And that's all I have to say, which means that is it for today's video. If you made it this far, then thank you so much for watching. You are definitely an OG, so pat yourself on the back. And if you liked this video, then please consider liking, subscribing, maybe even commenting, and I will see you in my next one. Bye!